Welcome to this event organised by Policy Exchange, Time to Disrupt an Industrial Strategy for the Digital Economy. Policy Exchange is a think tank that takes science, technology and innovation very seriously. It's a very important part of our research streams, and we, in all sorts of different guises, look at it from energy through to the economic and social consequences of it. And we also are very interested in the social dimensions of it, which speaks directly to one of our panellists this afternoon. Alistair Cohen is the founder and CEO of OnCare, and I think it's, without introducing you, it's a serious attempt to actually make contemporary technology work for home carers in the home setting. I was saying that I went to my first conference on what technology could do to help people at home in difficult circumstances as frailty crept up on them at Surrey University in 1987, but somehow the practicalities of it have never quite come through. I know we've got the community alarms and they were a giant step forward, but there's got to be much more we can do there. We have Anthony Beilin, sorry, it was written wrong on my piece of paper, but I remembered the wrong rather than the right, who's from Aviva, our sponsor, and he works in Aviva's technology centre in the east of London, which is a very exciting hub, which I'm very much looking forward to actually going to see. And I know that Aviva's put a lot of effort into trying to develop technical apps and get people to think about not just the insurance of how do you get the payout when it's all gone wrong, but how do you think about the car, the home, and indeed your own health to prevent the need for the emergency friend who comes to rescue at the end of the day. And our final panelist to my left is Birgitte. Andersen from the Big Innovation Centre, Professor of Economics at Birkbeck College, has international reputation in all these areas. And our final panelist who's just joined us is Clive Effort MP, who was a minister at the Department of Culture, and I think actually worked on some of these. Shadow, right? Yes. Has worked on some of these. Issues directly, and we're very pleased to actually have him here. And I dare say, like me, having been a member of a local authority, we're actually warm to Alistair Cohen's exploration of the practical things of making technology work in people's home, in the home care environment. Now, we've got quite a little agenda for us here. Policy Exchange recognises that the things that transform living standards and growth are the combination of innovation and technology and competition. And the big question we've got to ask is, how can we actually make sure that innovation is buttressed by competition policies so that incumbents are not protected? How do we ensure that we get the diffusion of technology across the economy as a whole? I mean, we were talking earlier about the way in which the steam engine was invented in 1712. But its full applications didn't come about until we had the steam turbine and the application towards electricity at the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century. So it's that long process of diffusion which is actually very important. Another area which I think is of critical concern is the way in which being an innovator can in practice confer monopoly power on you. And I know that was very much a concern of the economists serving in President Obama's administration until January this year. And the other thing that I'm quite intrigued by, and I've had a word with our panellists just to say we might have a go and see if we can do this. I'm conscious that when we talk about disruption, it's not just a new technology. It's a new technology that fundamentally changes the way other things are done. So I think some people would like this. When cars were invented in 1890, they were not disruptive. They were very expensive, they didn't work very well, and it didn't make much difference. Once you had Fordism, mass manufacturing, cheap cars that could be relied on, that was the disruption. So I think if I actually ask Professor Andersen to kick off for us.
Thank you.
And then we work through, and then I hope we'll have plenty of time for questions and debate and badinage between all of us in the room.
Okay, thank you very much. So to me, speaking about disruptive technologies, I will focus on artificial intelligence. The Big Innovation Centre, where the CEO is also the Secretariat for Parliament on the All-Party Parliamentary Group on AI, and also we are Secretariat for Parliament on the All-Party Parliamentary Group on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So we are bringing evidence into Parliament that affects a regulation policy in the budget. So you're absolutely right about disruption, because artificial intelligence is as important as a steam engine, the railways, electrification, agricultural, chemistry, and of course digitalization and the internet. It's disrupting everything. That means that it's disrupting the way in which we live, it's disrupting what we do when we go to work, if we go to work, and it's disrupting the way in which we socialize in our spare time. But clearly, what I will focus on here, there are two things that has to be important for the industrial strategy in this area here. And I want to speak about two things in my 6 minutes. The first is going to be how I believe that every sector, place, region, home and country and car needs to be AI friendly across the whole of UK by 2025. And that's very different from the ambition of which we saw that for driverless cars, we talk about 20% by 2035. So clearly, I want to be much more radical. The other one I want to speak about is about how the industrial strategy and regions and policy really need to get a kick in terms of the way in which they use data and the models which they're using when they're implementing the industrial strategy and creating regional economic growth. But anyway, if I can focus on the first thing first, artificial intelligence is meant to, globally, there will be invested, or it will add about $15.7 trillion to the global economy and about 15 billion to the UK economy, and that's data coming out of PwC. There are lots of other data showing how the growth rates will, across the 10 developing countries, will double to AI, and in Japan it will triple. So clearly that's very important. We talk also a lot about how intelligent agents like chatbot or how Internet of Things also, or how data exchanges are changing the business models in the private sector, and I'm sure you're going to hear a lot about this right now today. But also, it's not only finance, insurance, and other business services and professional services. It's really radical. It's also changing public services. And I just want to come with one example. If we had completely AI economy, could our terrible tragedy around Grenfell Tower, could that have been prohibited? 4 years ago, we did a hack day or hack week with Camden Council and the Race of Corpus, and we looked at how using big data could change, could revolutionize and make much cheaper and better public repair services to social housing, which is very relevant here, and also change the ambulance service and change the way in which we approach crime. The problem was that we didn't really have any public data on any people. We didn't know who lived where, but we had all the private data on what bills they pay, those who live there. So this is one area, but not always the names on the bills. So, and of course, I believe that if we could put all the public data together, that could happen. And I know that New York City has something they call a digital geek squad. And they're exactly about big data and artificial intelligence and how that can help public services. But to that happen, we have a big problem in the country here. We don't really share our data. And we don't need to have to share our data because we own all our data. In some way, that's very good. The problem is we can't do anything with them. And something we're discussing in Parliament is a data charter. So really, if me using your data makes me better off, and you're not having any disadvantages, don't I have the user right to your data? Well, I would if I lived in the United States, and I would have lived in South Korea and several other countries, but in this country here, we have complete ownership on our data. And I'm certainly personally pushing a data charter where everybody is forced into the digital sharing revolution. You're born in to share your data and you opt out, not the other way around. And when you're opting out of sharing some of your data, you may not be able to go on the road in your driver's car, or there's a social contract involved in it. So that's the only way in which we can actually boost the AI economy, by sharing data. So we need policy and regulation where we are all forced to share our data, on which we can opt out, but we will then lose some of the social contract. Of course, fair use is an important aspect, and clearly right now the big companies can use our data, so why don't we actually get a little bit of control back to ourselves? The other aspects, so the first thing, this is basically data capitalism meets public services. That's my first point. The other point I want to make is that really the data which are collected by Office of National Statistics and Companies House and Bank of England and Treasury, Community Innovation Survey, etc., of which we're basing in our policies on, and of which we're actually basing our real economic growth on, are really insufficient. First of all, the data we collect are so few, so it's incredible compared to what you can do in the AI revolution. Secondly, many data are missing, and thirdly, all the models we use are totally outdated. And we're discussing now about productivity measures. Clearly, with AI, you can do something completely radical. We could actually, we are in the Big Innovation, the Big and major platform is working for 2 years, in which we're importing data from our public databases and scraping the internet and scraping corporate websites and people's websites and Facebook and the academic website, etc. And then we try to develop diagnostic tools, because with tons of data, you don't want to have macroeconomic models. You want to solve problems with diagnostic tools. And I have been traveling in 6 regions in China, and that's exactly what they try to do. Yes, right, China didn't have a history of data collectors, but now they do. And they were creating what they call technology and economic development zones. And there they were collecting data around a whole range of like industry systems, startup systems, talent systems, livelihood systems. They had like 8 global systems, and from that one, they basically created a diagnostic tools where by going online, you can see how easy to move goods and services around, how easy to grow a business, what's the crime there. So anybody can just go online and tap and get these things. And I think we should do that in the UK too. I actually think that our policy and industrial strategy is running without any diagnostic tools on what regions and sectors look like. And it sounds very trivial, but it's very, very serious. So to me, 2 things. We need the whole country to be AI ready by 2025. We need data capitalism, we need meeting public services, and also we need to create proper diagnostic tools in which we can work with to create regional economic growth.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Anthony.
That's quite a show to follow. Good morning, everybody. If I take a step back, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with artificial intelligence and Internet of Things, but I think what they are is capabilities. They're building blocks for how we can build solutions that people can benefit from. And often when I talk about the use of technology for a transformative industry change or whatever, I think of a story someone told me. There was a meeting at the beginning of the internet at Stanford University of some of the professors, I think it was. And they were talking about this explosion of the thing called the World Wide Web and what this would mean and how people could benefit. And there was 2 very interesting outcomes. One of the guys said, well, wouldn't it be brilliant if we could find the top 1,000 websites? So he went away and wrote a book called The Top 1,000 Websites, and it sold less than 1,000 copies. One of his counterparts sitting at the table started a search engine called Yahoo and made £1 billion or whatever he made off the back of it. And I think, for me, that's a really succinct example of the fact that we can have as much capability as we want, but the application of it and the use of it to empower consumers is really, I think, what makes something innovative or disruptive or transformative. What does AI mean to anyone here? Well, nothing in its pure form, but with open banking coming, from January in this year, and with the explosion of data that we're collecting, there is going to be a whole range of new services and tools and experiences that we will all come to use day in, day out. And for me, my favorite application of AI is in the silly how many people have Spotify on their mobile phone? How many people love their Sunday morning playlists? That's artificial intelligence really making something complicated like what do I put on this morning really simple for a consumer. And if you start with the simple problems, if you start with things that make a difference, we can apply technology behind the scene to make life easier. Now, how do you take those learnings and actually apply them to the really important stuff like I can't save enough for my pension, or I'm taking a driverless vehicle, how do I ensure it's safe, or the overpopulation of cities needs to be better managed, whether it's refuge or electricity or housing. this is where we can start to apply these capabilities, but there's no quick fix, right? This is the first step of a very long revolution that's going to come. And I highly doubt in 1,000 years they're going to look back and talk about this 10-year period. This is kind of pre-launch, I would say. We're the original pioneers of digital, I think. But I don't think we're the breakthrough artists. I don't think we're the ones who are going to transform the world as you know it yet. We're testing the original hypotheses. We're doing the original experiments. So right now it's selective music, but AI, data, the combination of these capabilities will create new services and tools as we move forward. And when they become common practice, when everyone sits here and talks about the application of them, as opposed to the hypotheses of what they could be, that's when I think, the big disruption will come. But it's early days. Half my friends when I go down the pub don't know what I'm talking about, nor do they particularly have any interest in what I'm talking about, which is probably more relevant. But making it consumable for people, and I even think here we still have an audience of people who have an active interest in this subject area. You've made an effort to come to Brighton and attend a session, but for most Joe Blogs at home in their cities and their lives with their children and their work, unless it delivers something so simple and easy, technology is merely a thing for them. And our challenge as industry, the challenge of entrepreneurs, of government, is to take these capabilities and forge them into something that can improve people's lives. That's the whole point of it. Some to make money, some to fix problems, some because they have a wild vision and dream of doing something special. So I think today, the context of where I will certainly speak from is less about the big innovation, but more about practically how this matters to people, real people. Looking forward to contributing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Well, all that practicality tees up Alistair very well indeed.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Alistair Cohen. I'm the CEO of a company called OnCare. I suppose the main message of kind of all the way I would approach what is innovation or what is disruption is that it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be some deep tech that no one understands. Blockchain for millennials on the AI something. You don't have to put all those words together. It's fine. So my company, what we do is we make software for the social care industry. So the moment when care workers go and visit their clients, no matter which type of clients they have to report on what they're doing. And the vast majority of the industry does that on pen and paper, which is not particularly good for a lot of people. One, because the family of that person who's receiving the care doesn't see that unless they go read a piece of paper. The care workers have to spend their time filling in lots of paperwork, which no one enjoys, regardless whether you're a care worker or not. Care workers often are not native English speakers, so that's even more complicated for them. Care agencies that are already struggling for money have to go and collect pieces of paper, read through them every month, and then store them for 8 years, which takes up a lot of space and money. It's not a good process. So essentially what we've created is we've created software for care workers that we've made super simple, and the software itself is not particularly complicated. It's not deep tech. It's a smartphone app that lets them report on what they're doing in a way that they can also use voice to text, so that you can use the capabilities of a smartphone, so you don't have to write. Families get notified of what the fact that the care worker turned up and what they did, and then the agency doesn't have to ship in bits of paper all over the place. So I suppose, to the points that you were making there, disruption doesn't have to be complicated. None of those things are particularly difficult. I think probably the most difficult thing for me is convincing care agencies it's not scary and we're not trying to do anything dangerous for the data. They have access to all the data, they own all that data. So innovation and disruption, I think, is taking pieces of things that already exist and finding a new application for them and a new way to put them together in a way that works correctly for the people that are intending to use it. I remember when I got my first job as a product manager, I was asked what's the definition of innovation. I think that's it. I think it's see what's out there at the moment, put them together and find a new application for it. And I think one of the reasons why we are doing well is because now is the time where actually everyone owns a smartphone. It's very difficult to buy a phone that's not a smartphone anymore, whereas 2, 3, 4 years ago that wasn't the case. Internet connectivity is pretty much everywhere. We still make it work offline because some parts around here don't have any phone signal. The South Coast is not good for phone signal, we discovered. So it does work offline and syncs when you're back online as well. Again, practical software that just existed that we've applied to this particular situation. And then just the rest of it's just web-based. So I think it's really interesting that you were talking about AI-friendly businesses and being ready for an AI future. I think in, 10, 15 years' time, in the same way as we don't talk about internet businesses anymore, we just talk about businesses or tech businesses, I think in a few years' time, AI will be so ingrained in everything everyone's doing especially for us, we're looking at how can we use the data collected by those care workers on those visits, even just through normal human language, writing normal sentences, to infer how a person's health is going and then try and course correct if that's not going the way it should be. AI will just be a part of all the businesses that we're involved in, and if it's not, then you won't be able to keep up with everyone else that's doing it. So that's going to be my stance for today, I guess, is that innovation and disruption doesn't have to be complicated.
Thank you very much indeed, Clive.
Yeah, well, I mean, my approach to this is really one of sort of a bemused legislator. If you I mean, quite clearly, affordability is at the root of this. If it becomes affordable and you can then, people can access it, and then it is a major disruptor and brings about major change. And it's happening very fast. And if I could take the example we've just heard about the software for care workers, well, who's that software for? For me as a legislator, is that for a company that wants to ensure that each care worker only spends a certain amount of time with each client and not 1 second more? Do they want to put a microchip on their uniform so that they can follow them around and make sure that they're not idling on work time? Or is it actually about the quality of the care service to the patient? And that's, who is the technology for, and how is it being used? Because one of the things that a big debate that's going on at the moment is about visits to people who need care are far too short, and that the quality of that care is a bit hit and miss. Yeah. So for a legislator, when this technology comes along, how do you make it work for the person who you're most concerned about? I mean, if I'm a former London taxi driver many years ago, and you might not be surprised that Uber is something I'm concerned about. Now, I've been listening to Uber telling us all over the weekend that they've got these 40,000 drivers that they're really concerned about, that could be put out of work. I don't remember Uber saying, that they were concerned about the other private hire drivers that they were putting out of work when they hit the scene 4 years ago. But at the same time, we all know that Uber are investing an extraordinary amount of money in autonomous vehicles, so they're not that concerned about the drivers at the end of the day. They're trying to actually get rid of the awkward human being that gets in their way and demands a wage. So again, it goes back to how do you as a legislator start to regulate these companies that are moving way ahead of the regulations and the legislation. Airbnb, I don't know if you've seen the stuff that's been going on in Barcelona with Airbnb. Airbnb, this organisation that says it's very democratic and that it's allowing these individuals to compete with the big multinational hotel companies, use their properties to make a little bit of money on the side. And of course, what's happening in Barcelona, there are protests now because rents are going up because people are buying properties to rent through Airbnb. And again, the regulators, there are having to catch up with the technology as it's moving forward. And it's clearly been, in the rented sector in Barcelona, it's clearly been very disruptive. And the healthcare sector. I mean, the healthcare sector, this is where it can bring enormous benefits. I mean, for instance, to get a scan and to have that scan looked at by a skilled professional can take 15, 20 minutes for that person to examine your scan. We now have technology that can examine those scans and tell whether you've got cancer in your body within a microsecond. So and this can be done right around the globe. A friend of mine who went for an examination, the specialist that was available was in Australia, and through the internet they were able to communicate with that person in Australia. They were able to look at and give a diagnosis almost immediately. So technology is really moving fast, and for us as legislators, it's how do we protect the individual and make sure it's used to benefit it's used for the greater good. I mean, and protection of data is absolutely essential. So because the freedom of access to data may be crucial in one person's eyes, but in another person's eyes, it might be intrusive, or it might be threatening. You go this ongoing argument about insurance companies, if they have access to people's health records, whether they would use that to examine whether that person, or determine whether that person is a risk if they were looking for insurance. So for us as legislators, I go back to my original point, this is happening so fast and so rapidly that we are now being challenged by, and go back to the point with Uber, we're now being challenged by these multinational companies, these huge companies that are investing in this new technology, that are moving ahead of the regulations and the legislation very fast. So Uber burst on the scene. It exploited the situation regarding employing people as self-employed workers. It used the technology to be able to get round the issue of having a meter like a licensed vehicle, and using GPS to measure distance and also to instruct drivers about their journeys. All of that happened very, very rapidly, and the licensing companies just weren't ready for it, and they weren't ahead of it. And this is happening right across the entire economy. I don't think there's any industry where you couldn't say is that the first question that we were asked to talk about today is what ones are ripe for disrupting. Everything's ripe for disrupting in this new fourth industrial revolution that we're in the middle of, or at the beginning of, as someone has pointed out. And for us as people who are concerned about public safety, the public good, about democracy, that these are laying down huge challenges for us that we haven't even begun to contemplate. And this industrial revolution is going to throw open all sorts of moral, and economic, and social, and regulatory challenges for politicians.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, are you going to ask some questions? Person there.
I'm Pardo from Citizens Advice. I was just wondering, sort of what's the role of kind of bringing consumers with us on this journey? So a lot of this kind of involves consumer trust and hopefully consent around how their data's shared and used, and sort of consumers tend to range from those who are really anxious and might therefore turn away from online services because they're worried about how their data might be shared, through to those who just tick the box saying, yeah, sure, without really reading or understanding what they're signing up to. And actually, often with online services, you can't actually access and use the service unless you agree to your data being used in particular ways. So people are faced with share my data or not get access to the service. So I was just wondering about how we can make sure that we're bringing consumers with us on this journey, sort of addressing any concerns they have around kind of how their data is going to be used and whether it's going to be secure, and also making sure that people are actively consenting and not just kind of passively saying yeah and then kind of perhaps reaping the consequences later.
I'm going to suggest we actually do three. So there's a gentleman sitting next to you, and then there's a hand with a man with glasses directly behind. So
I'm Daniel Johnson, member of the Scottish Parliament for Edinburgh Southern. I very much agree with what Alistair Cohen was saying around essentially all businesses will be tech businesses. Certainly I come from a retail background, and that is very much the attitude in the industry, one that where we don't call it automation, we call it online shopping. And I think I hear what Birgitte was saying around we need our business to be AI ready. I think Clive is absolutely right that we need to think about how to legislate, but I think there's a sort of missing component which is around skills. So if we really want to benefit from this, we need to make sure that our workforce is ready and skilled up. And I'm just really interested to hear from the panel of what does that look like, because I don't think it's just a one hit. It's not about getting it right in schools. It's not about getting it right in apprenticeship. I think it's an ongoing process. I'd just be interested to know what the panel thought about that.
And
thank you. James Drew, I'm at an advertising company called Havas. It's just an idea, I suppose, as much as anything. What I've heard from Clive and other speakers is that the technology is going quicker than the regulatory regime. And it seems to me that there's pockets of real expertise within government and with Parliament, self-selecting groups of all-party groups and so on. We've got a government, the way government's set up, we have a ministry, the DCMS, there's some real expertise there. The government has the Government Digital Service, which is a real sort of pocket of expertise. But it just seems to me we're sort of set up the wrong way around. Every government department should have a chief technology officer, which they perhaps do, but the ministers themselves need to perhaps organise themselves slightly differently, so everyone is understanding that this is baked into everything we do, not just it's a sort of a bit of government that they seem to know what they're talking about, but we all sort of plod on with life in the same way we've always done. I think it just requires everyone to think a bit differently about how we run government.
Thank you very much. Andersen, why don't you lead us off?
On all three?
Well, pick anything. If you want to do all three, you do all three. If you want to pick and mix, do whatever you fancy.
So I'll start with the government department element. Not so much on government, but I look at Aviva as a business, and digital cannot be some element of the company over here. It has to be integrated because everything links back to digital. And in any highly functioning team, whether it's in the military or whether it's in business, you have to have multiple skills combined together. And they may be legal skills, they may be operational skills, but absolutely digital skills need to be embedded in pretty much every operation there is. And moving forward, this will only get worse. If there isn't teams that are leveraging digital capabilities, they will simply fall behind. And I think that's a matter of fact now. I think the rise of CTOs within government, and in the US particularly, is credence to this, but in the UK we're seeing it with pretty much every business now. There is huge digital departments, huge digital budgets, which are being applied towards helping companies integrate digital into the old way of doing business. That's kind of about using the technology to make the service or the product. The question is about consumers. So everything we try and do is for the consumer. I think with any revolution, you can never take 100% of people on a journey. And that's not to say it's okay to leave some people behind. But I don't think the entire population will ever become digital first natives. Certainly not as of today. I think the new generation are completely different to us. Our kids and I've got a 3-year-old cousin I was with over the weekend, and he was playing on his iPad and his mother took it off him. The first thing he did was walk over to the TV and start trying to swipe it. I mean, I don't think you need a better example than that. So I think the new generation will feel and experience digital a lot differently than we will, and they'll be a lot more comfortable with it. But I don't think you can take everyone on the journey. It starts at school. I know lots of businesses and institutions are trying to upskill elderly members of the population. I think Barclays had a magnificent digital legal scheme, because actually the only way they can access digital tools and services is if you give them the skills to do so. It's a prerequisite to accessing. So there needs to be a lot done, but I don't think you can take everyone with you. I also think that there is a natural distrust of the web for certain things. My mum is a great example. She doesn't like to put her bank details online still. Regardless of what I tell her, what I show her, how I explain SSL certificates or Stripe, she's not interested. That's a consumer confidence thing. Just like many consumers won't use certain services, they've had a bad experience, or if they read something about something in the paper, they'll be dissuaded from using that. So it is difficult, and I think there will be challenges in terms of, but the only way I think people will really take up these things is if it really matters to them. If it's something that fundamentally affects their lives. So I hark back to one of the things we know well about pensions. Pensions is a big problem, it's a big issue as we have an aging population. And the more we can empower people to manage their finances using technology, giving them benefit back, the more people will be inclined to do so. The more they tell their friends, the more their friends tell their friends. And I don't want to get caught too much up on Uber, but Uber's success was because the consumer liked it, right? Forget the regulation aside, we all want safe transport, we all want a safe environment. But the fact was, consumers shared it with their friends. That's how it grew. So there is a huge amount of weight behind the idea that if it benefits the consumer, it will always succeed. And people who are not digitally savvy will use it, and they will learn about it, and they will take it up, because if it benefits them, people want the easiest and best way to live their life. It's a fact. So I think that people will upskill naturally. I think peer groups can do a lot to help people learn about pivotal and impactful services and experiences. I think OnCare is a great example. You know, if you've got if you're caring for your parent and you have a great experience through something different, you're going to tell others in your Alzheimer's group or in your whatever care society you may be functioning in. So, you know, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick, and unfortunately, we're probably the generation that's going to take most of the heavy lifting on this, as I said earlier.
Alistair.
Yeah, I suppose to address the questions in order, bringing consumers along. So to the earlier point I was trying to make about innovation doesn't have to be complicated. We were looking at building a ratings feature because we want to start getting feedback from clients about how they're experiencing their care, and we want to get feedback from care workers about how they're experiencing their clients, because we don't want aggressive clients getting care workers to leave. We don't want clients having a terrible time of their care either. So we're looking at how can we involve the often elderly clients in rating their own care, and a smartphone or an iPad app is not the way forward, because these are people who typically don't have smartphones or tablets that they use for more than maybe sort of Skyping their grandkids or bits and pieces like that. So actually we were looking at a system where we can send out paper letters. Even though we're trying to eradicate the paper in the care delivery side, paper may actually be the best solution for the bringing the consumer along in terms of their care. Get them to say, here's the carers you've seen in the last few months, give them a little rating, and then if you can, just write down any comments and we'll transpose that into our system when it comes back. So actually that provides a massive amount of valuable data for the care agencies and the care workers about how the clients are feeling without having to involve some complex technology they'd have to learn. So, like I say, it doesn't have to be complicated to be effective. We empower the agencies and the clients to choose whether they invite their family members to receive text messages and updates on their care. So if a client says, I don't want my family involved because there's suspected abuse or whatever it happens to be, the family don't get involved. It's the client's choice as to whether the family get invited to their account. So it's not, unless they have power of attorney, the family could choose herself, but if they have all their capacity, they could say, no, I want to keep that data to myself. So that's how we're trying to address things in OnCare. With regard to skilled workforce, our target user for our app is a 65-year-old non-smartphone using non-native English speaking care worker. That's why we've done big old chunky icons, very little text. We've made voice to text a real feature of all the demos we give, even though we haven't built it because it's in the phone, but most people don't know it's there. Really trying to hone in on the need for zero training to get going on the app, which means that the 18, 19-year-old care workers, it's a piece of piss for them, they don't have to worry about it, but everyone can use it as well. So we're trying to, that's our target. It's actually a bloke that we piloted with on one of our first pilots, who we tried to have a web version, and as soon as he touched anything that wasn't the main part of the app, he touched the address bar or he touched the tabs, he got confused and he handed the phone back to me. He was like, I don't know where I am. And we're like, right, this is not going to work. We need a native app because it gets rid of all that crap around the reporting tool that you don't need. And he's now he's in the back of my mind whenever we're building our reporting tools. And then the final point in terms of technologists in government, I have a strong, long-held belief that product managers would make the best politicians. It's a product manager's role, so I was product manager by training. It's a product manager's role to go and pick yourself in someone else's life, understand what that feels and looks like, understand what the problems are faced by that person or group of people, and then develop solutions. Doesn't have to be complicated again, but solutions within your budget that can solve problems for those people. So I've spent many a 6 a.m. start with care workers. That's another part of the way we design the app, is that if you can use something when you're groggy at 6 a.m, it's kind of like the drunk test for technology. Very effective technology if you can use it when you've just woken up and you're still kind of pre-coffee getting up for the day. But yeah, I believe that the politicians, if there were people whose job it was to go out and actually spend their time with members of the community to solve specific problems, like you can't solve everyone's problems all the time, but to solve specific problems by observing and feeling what that pain is like, we might maybe get some more progress more quickly.
Brigitte.
Yeah, I just want first of all to talk about a little bit about consumers. Often we speak about as if the consumers have a big risk of sharing their data. We just need to know now also that consumers are not always getting the very good healthcare. For example, what if you could get much better healthcare by sharing your data? What if you can get treated much better for your diabetes if you're sharing your data? What if your energy bill can be much cheaper by sharing your data? What if your children's school is much better by sharing your data? What if there's less traffic accidents by sharing your data? That's how we need to start. And then we need to think, okay, how do we then, for all this value that can be created, what do we think the best regulation is? Because speaking about disruption, we have a regulation now that fits to the current system, but when we're creating value and business models in new ways, regulation needs to change. And I'm not, and I very much believe in the social goods, and I believe that everybody, of course, have a right to the data, but everybody also have a right to use data if it actually helps them. And I think we need to start there. What I believe we need to have what we call, that's what it is in Parliament, AI watchdogs. So when you get to the data chart and how data are shared, you need an AI watchdog that actually looks after the guidelines, how you're being treated by the standards. Also, you need AI ethics boards, so data ethics boards. They have them in several companies already, like Microsoft and Facebook, etc. How are they going to be using the data? What can be done? And they need to be following strict guidelines to the data charter. And therefore, by actually accepting we share data, but under certain guidelines, these guidelines have to be following an international code. So if you're buying a driverless cars from China, that needs already to be embedded in it. So it has the global thing. So that's how I would approach the first thing, is the value, and then put the regulation in place. I'm sure also insurance companies is about giving people a better insurance. It's not about, and bankers want to do better finance. It's about creating the value and not taking it away from people. That means that trust needs to come back in the society, because society has lost a lot of trust, and that needs to come back. The other thing I want to focus on the skill issue, I completely agree with the previous point that previous revolutions have actually had, unfortunately, certain jobs will not happen. Mechanization of agriculture, certain people lost their jobs because of mechanization. Robotics in manufacturing, certain people have lost their job. So we need to think about a transition period, and it's not always about reskilling the same people, but about focusing. We can do what we can do, but also focusing also on the next generation, and it has to start at the school gates, and they have to do investment right now, and government has to put investment at the school gates to make sure we are all kind of AI ready. The last point of governing departments, of course government needs to lead this. Every single government department, every single public service needs to get it, and they need to have the CTO or whatever it is to understand this is actually done, because public services are 1/3 of all services, and mainly the core services most of us receive are public.
Thank you. Clive.
Yeah.
Who receives all the complaints rather than all the pieces of excitement over there?
Yeah. So a friend of mine had a 6-year-old come to visit, and was playing on an iPad with my friend's 4-year-old, and the 6-year-old downloaded his favourite game to show the 4-year-old on the iPad. Now, I'm sure I could sort of work that out and do it myself if I was playing on that iPad. But that's the consumer of the future. When I was a kid, Etch-a-Sketch was new technology. So that things are going to change, and they're going to change rapidly. So the consumer of the future is what we're planning for. The issue about what we're talking about here, let's just get back to one or two basics. The infrastructure of it, right? Let's just look at that. It's not universal. In this country, there are places where you cannot get super fast broadband. And why can't you? Because it's not economical to do it. I mean, I've sat at Labour Party conference, I've spoken to BT and said to them, why can't you make when I was a shadow minister in DCMS, why can't you make it universal? Why can't, it's just not, it's not practical, it's not affordable. So those communities are not economically viable for us. The government will have to pay for it. In this multi-billion-pound industry, the public purse is expected to pay for this bit of infrastructure. Now, when we talk about data, just taking that example, bearing that example in mind, the danger of universal access to data and saying that this will eventually benefit everybody is that everyone will focus on where the maximum profit is to be made from the. If I use the bus industry as an example, take Manchester's bus industry. You could get run over by the amount of buses that are going up and down Oxford Road through the middle of Manchester, because that's the profitable route. If you go to the hinterland of Manchester, no buses there because there's not much money to be made. There is no public subsidy for them to provide a public service. They are purely driven by seeking that profit. And if you think of the data and the internet as in that same way, Those people in that hinterland are the people who will suffer and be excluded. And for the legislators, it's how do you make that system work for everybody and for the benefit of everyone. So and you know, how do we take the consumer with us? You know, when I was first elected a member of Parliament, if you went to close a sub post office, all the pensioners in the area would complain because they used to queue up outside the sub post office. Sub post offices are closing everywhere now. No one's raising any voice against it because they now all have check cards and they go to, you know, ATS machines and you know, the consumer has changed. But people along the way get excluded by this advance in technology, and we have to bear that in mind. Regarding the skills, yes, I mean, I think you're right. It's an ongoing thing. It's always going to change, and we're going to have to keep up with it. And people are learning those basic skills, like that 6-year-old, just through the experience of using the internet. But the thing we've got to plan for in the future, because all these big multinational companies, Apple, Uber, you know, they're all planning to employ fewer people. They're replacing, automation is replacing workers. You can't stand in the way of the technology, but you've got to plan for it. We are going to have a society where there's going to be an increasing number of jobless people, and how do we plan for that? And bless you for being so having so much confidence in our civil service that they could actually grasp this issue. I mean, if the tech officers that I would employ are in our universities. They are the people I would have. You know, I forget the name of the guy who's hacked into the Pentagon. That we had a big battle over him being extradited to the USA. I said we were in government at the time, and I said to our ministers, just employ him. You know, if he's that good, why don't we just employ him? Just pay him. Don't send him off to America to serve a prison sentence. Let him work out how to protect our data and use these people. And that, I mean, and you know, you've got to go to where the experts are and use that, enhance their expertise if you're going to stay ahead of this, because you might be dealing with this problem today, but the next problem down the road is even, you know, greater and extremely and very vastly different. So you know, you've got to go to where the experts are. I don't think you can employ them.
So a few more questions. Gentleman at the front, please.
I'm Andrew Silverman.
If you just, I think there's enough of us to make it worthwhile.
Excellent, good. I shall enunciate. I'm Andrew Silverman, Head of Corporate Affairs at a fintech company called Neighbour, and I'm a former civil servant as well for my possible sins. Two issues strike me here. The first is that we're not focusing on outputs of public policy. So we're talking about tactical things, whether it's car journeys, whether it's apps and stuff like that. So I'm still interested in outputs of public policy in the same way that I would have been in 1945 with Clem Attlee's government. So how is this technical revolution going to actually bring better outputs from public policy? And I think that's a challenge for industry and for the civil service as well. And the second thing is this, and again, it's a very quick question. Anthony spoke about how people spread, Uber spread via people and the benefits, etc. Well, virtue doesn't come from spreading stuff. And I'm not saying Uber's good or bad, I'm not judging that. Because to be frank, big tobacco spread quite a lot as well from people passing it on during wartime and stuff like that. And there was no virtue from that. So it's not the spreadability, it's the virtue aspect of it which we've got to think about. And the virtue aspect of it goes straight through to how technology is going to deliver better public policy.
There's a gentleman straight there with his hand. Yeah.
Thank you. Richard Mollett from the RELX Group. We're an information analytics company behind Elsevier, LexisNexis. And I'd like to pick up on what Birgitte was saying about, if you like, the social and economic cost of privacy, that social services will not develop unless data can be freely shared. And we look at our American businesses, they're able to do so much more to advance efficiency in public services and in commercial services than one can do in the European environment simply because of data law. And to Mr. Effort's point, I think we can bring consumers with us and voters with us if we show the efficiencies that can be done to, for instance, tax collection and social security fraud using artificial intelligence to crunch the numbers. So the question behind all that is, do the panel think the data regime in Europe is right and is going to help these services develop, or is it actually holding us back?
And the gentleman there. Yeah. Caught my eye first.
Oh, hello. I'm Gary Heather. I'm a councillor in Islington in North London. The thing that interests me in this is that we're talking about, I think the first speaker talked about the amount of growth and income would be generated by this. What about the how are we going to share that value out? I mean, the thing that interests me is that, is this going to lead to even more asymmetrical power relations in relation to employees with their employer? And how will we ensure that, that workers in this get a fair share of this extra income and growth that's created?
Now, I think we're going to be hard-pressed to actually do another round of questions and give the panel a sort of orderly way of summing up what they think. So I'm going to just get the panel to answer those questions, and then if there's a quick question after that, we'll try and do it. Otherwise, I'll try and give everyone about a minute to say, well, this is my message to you. So I think that's sort of in your direction, really.
Okay, so just, right. Okay, yeah, but we'll take the last one first then. How do we ensure that the workers share? I think the question with this issue, it's so vast and so all-encompassing. I think it's how we make sure that everyone benefits in this, because it's not just about employees. It's about how the explosion of new technology, artificial intelligence in particular, is going to impact on how we do stuff, and whether it's how we employ people, whether we employ people, and how we provide services. And we leading on to the other point about the data regime and the regulation and the output of public policy. The question for people like me who are a bit befuddled by all this and trying to sort of get to grips with it as a sort of a legislator is, how do we get a system in place where we're ahead of this, that we have a regulatory framework in place that works for the benefit of everyone, and how that is robust enough to stand up to future advancement. At the moment, we're playing catch up. The Apple and Uber and Airbnb and all these huge multinational companies are way ahead of politicians and civil servants and legislators. The point about Uber exploded on the scene because it was extremely popular with the generation that have the smartphones, and the app was just it's one of those words. The name Uber became nobody talks about getting a cab, you get an Uber, and it became part of the culture for certainly for a younger generation, and. But the question is for those people who have to regulate that industry, is that working for the common good? Is it safe? Is it working within the rules? And we need to be able to really we need to try to anticipate what is happening in this field of advancement if we are going to stay ahead of the game and ensure that we enhance this new technology, this artificial intelligence, the speed of the internet and everything else, and the exchange of data, and this is an absolutely crucial area. The exchange of data actually works for the common good, and that we don't stand in the way of innovation, but we enhance it for that common good rather than appear that we are people who want to be a bunch of Luddites that stand in the way of advancement and change. But it is a real challenge for those people in the industry as well, in that skill set, that are breaking those barriers and pushing the barriers back to actually think about that wider and moral question of is what they're doing for the benefit of everyone, or is it just for a swift profit at the expense of the wider public? And that is a huge challenge for us politicians. With regard to the data regime in Europe, I really don't know. I technically, I'm not. I don't know what whether that is robust enough for for the future. But it's certainly an area where there is very little debate about this in Parliament at the moment. But this is the big challenge that's coming our way. is how do you deal with this advance of technology that the private sector in particular is grasping, and that they are all the time challenging and probing the regulatory framework, and we are not really at the table yet as legislators. And it is us at the end of the day that protect the public from being exploited. But at the same time, it's also us that has to enhance and grasp this new technology to make it work for everyone. And it's a huge challenge for us all. It's an absolutely huge challenge, and I think we'll be back at several conferences in the future, discussing this and analysing how we reacted to it and how we take all of this forwards, because these challenges are going to be with us for a generation or more.
Anthony, welcome on that European data.
Yeah,
who's got the right system?
Well, I think we're going to take a part of legislation that's changed. We look at financial services, so the forthcoming regulation on open banking, PSD2, and GDPR, which kind of sits as an accompanying piece. I think the regulators have been fairly forward-thinking in terms of creating regulations that are going to increase competition, increase innovation, and increase consumer opportunities by regulating ahead of the banks. I think we had a industry that was very stagnant, that was monopolised by major players who, if 2008 is anything to go by, hadn't always behaved and looked after themselves properly in every instance. And we now have a situation where they are being mandated to open up services that increase competition. We're going to be given control of our own data and consent where we want it to go in exchange for the services and experiences that we like and want. And these type of regulations are going to be pivotal is not a word yet.
Innovating.
Yeah.
Always innovating.
That's my closing point, innovating on everything. But they're going to be pivotal. They're going to be pivotal towards how industries, and this is the same for government and public services, adapt to new technology. Somebody has to take a step back and think about what are the core assets. The core assets in industry used to be one thing, they are now changing. And the value of them to business will change. So I think open banking and PSD2 in Europe has been a great example of the legislative bodies or the regulators take a proactive approach to putting law first. And we're going to see, and come January 18, I think there's going to be a lot of value for the consumers who are going to benefit from this a lot. Just responding to your question about how do we take workers along with you. I'm not necessarily a professor on literature, but I'm pretty sure a revolution always has changes in the social contract. I cannot envisage this revolution not having a fragmenting, a destroying of the existing social contract. Menial jobs, and more interestingly, kind of medium-skilled jobs are going to be replaced. I don't think that's a wild statement. I think jobs all the way up to lawyers, accountants, doctors are under threat. So we now have a society where any menial task, any task that's based on understanding and reason, is subject to disruption. Therefore, A, what do we do with all the people? And B, how do we make them benefit? Well, I think it links straight back to skills. There isn't enough developers. Any business you speak to lacks developers, or they're too expensive. So we should be taking every single person who goes out of job, and this is not an Aviva policy, by the way, but we should be helping them become developers. I watched a movie recently about the start of the NASA space program, and computers used to be the black ladies who physically wrote out the notes from the professors. And then they all learned how to use the IBM machine because their job was replaced by the IBM machine. We need to do exactly the same. We need to absolutely upskill the population in understanding how they can contribute, bring down the cost of digital development, bring down the cost of innovation for businesses, government services, get people real life experience of these things. And then actually they can be part of the revolution as opposed to kind of suffering. But I don't think everyone's bad. As I say, there is regulations, there is parts of different business and industry and legislative who are adapting and changing. And I think, on a final note, India was able to give identity cards, digital identity cards to 1.2 billion people in really rural, unaccounted for parts of a vast country. I think we should be doing a lot more. I think we can do a lot more. And I don't think it's a huge leap from where we are today to achieve it. So that's kind of my sum up point as well.
That was very helpful. And Esther.
Yeah, I'll try and be quick because I know we're running out of time. But
Minute Man moment.
Yeah, okay, so there's some big stuff to tackle. So public policy, just to touch on public policy, I suppose one of the things that we've come up against is that the local authorities tend to be the ones that push for, I want you to know the time you clocked in, the time you clocked out, and how much it cost us. They don't really seem to care when you get to the bottom of it what the care quality was. That tends to be the regulators, which is good because the regulators do care. And the regulators are very supportive of what we're doing, which is nice to see. But I suppose it's how do we get the policy to then trickle down to the local authority level is a tough one. The data regulation in Europe, we want to try and take the data we're collecting to help people's health improve. We have to be very careful. There was the DeepMind NHS example where they anonymised a load of data, but if you pieced together the different bits they'd anonymise, you could guess who the person was, and you could put it back to an individual. We've got to be very careful with it. But yeah, with GDPR coming in, I think it's difficult for startups because we have to then spend a lot of our time and resource knowing what all this regulation means. But it's also very important because we want to make sure that people have the use of their own data and the ability to say, no, I don't want that to be shared here or used in this way. Very interesting company called People.io, and their entire company, which has come out of the same incubator we have, or same company, their whole business is about taking ownership of your data again and licensing it to the people that you want to get services from, as opposed to just blanket accepting terms and conditions and making it your responsibility to read up on what's going on. And then finally, on the workers coming along, I think actually social care is a really interesting industry where we need people and will continue to need people until a machine can provide a caring or meaningful interaction with a human being, or wipe someone's bottom, or change pads in a very careful way and move someone to the right position in bed, knowing what they're feeling and saying. Until we have that, we will need more people in social care. And one of the things that we want to do as OnCare is we want to celebrate care workers for the sort of superheroes that they are. My hope is when we build out our platform more, care workers can use their own clocked hours through OnCare, their own sort of micro credentials, if I can put a catheter in or I can change someone's pads, whatever it happens to be, to demand higher wages, because at the moment there's no real LinkedIn for care workers. They get poached by the people who can pay them more. There's a vacuum that then gets filled by the lesser skilled care workers, and we then have job progression and career progression through social care, which doesn't really exist today. The people who've been in it for 10 years get paid the same as people who've been in it for 2 weeks, which is not a great industry to be in. And maybe if there are other industries that are dislodging workers from one area, they'd be very welcome in social care because there's definitely a need for them there.
Brigitte.
I want to just two things. The thing with shared value, I think we should not be fooled that clearly, in my view, technology has nothing to do with shared value. So, for example, I know right now the government is looking at the corporate governance code. So we are in a situation in which we have excessive executive pay, high bonuses, and lots of dividends paid out to shareholders for companies in decline, tax avoidance, not much value to consumers, etc. That has nothing to do with the technology. That's something to do with corporate governance and something to do with whether companies need to declare purpose. And in 2004, there was an act, the Companies Act in the UK, that was never enforced. So clearly, companies need to deliver the product first and create for the purposes. Otherwise, we end up with hostile takeovers, and in the last 25 years, there have lots of hostile takeovers and also good takeovers. But I think that the foreign ownership in the country has grown from 12% to 40%. You can check the data, but this is what it's all about. It's nothing to do with technology. So these are completely different things. That's one thing I want to say. So look into the corporate governance codes if that's what where your interests are. The other thing I want to say is that AI, better output for public policy, the first point there, absolutely. And I really think that with artificial intelligence we can get much better output from public services because we can both perform them better, but also we have all the data in which we can actually create and shape the implementation of public policies much better. And that's one of the things I want to push, and I'm also trying to push in my influence on the industrial strategies that use diagnostic tools, use data to implement it. Don't just go by your ideas.
Well, I'd like to thank the panel very much indeed for coming and making this a very lively and interesting session. There is a danger when you talk about technology. You get stuck in the geeky stuff that has a sort of lack of intelligibility on the one hand, or you actually become so vague you never get to grips with it at all. Last week, the ONS had their forum on social statistics. And what I found quite interesting about that is I knew that the new digital economy bill had been passed, but it will actually give the ONS for the first time a lot of direct links to government data on tax and the real data as opposed to survey data, and they will slowly get the opportunity to use private data as well. And certainly some of the statisticians who are old lags who used to work at the Department of Employment with me, whose judgment I trust, certainly persuaded me that this was actually really quite big potatoes, and they would actually produce much better statistics out of that data in a way we've never really had before. And the other thing which is very interesting is they're very keen to hear from us. Now sometimes they say we'd like to hear, let's go through the motions of doing what they do, but I think they genuinely are trying to actually find out what we would like, how we'd like it to be presented, and they're also mindful of very simple things. If you don't spend your time working out an index number ratio change, they're happy to do it for you. And I think that anything you give in to them, they will be looking for it. So I thank all the panel very much for coming. I thank our sponsors very much. We had a great thing in the conferences last year held by Aviva, and it's very pleased to have them with us again this time. And thank you all so much indeed. I hope you've enjoyed it.